Howdy guys and gals, I'm Kyle Broderick. Welcome back to the Social Regressive, where we are continuing to work up this Savage 12FV project rifle. Our goal is to get this within $1,000 to be able to hit our big old 30x40 steel gong out at a mile. Now, that's kind of a silly shot for a 6.5 Creedmoor. It's going to be subsonic for a long time before it hits that spot. But it's going to be able to do it anyway if we have a nice calm day, and then we're going to have a bunch of more practical challenges to go along with this. We'll probably have some mixed distance shooting, shooting in wind, do some hunting. We're going to see what we can get up to with this rifle, and we're going to have this for a long time to test it out. But some of the work that we've done on here so far, we have installed and bedded the base right here. We wanted to make sure there weren't any gaps, so if you want to make sure that yours is squared away, go check out that video. We have also mounted and leveled the scope. This is an SWFA 12X, a fixed power mil-quad scope right here. And I think this is going to be completely up to the challenge of what we're going to do. $300 scope, and this is going to help us get to that overall price tag of around $1,000. Now for today, we are going to take a look at the bottom metal. This is going to be one of the more interesting parts of this whole series, and I think one of the most difficult parts to work up. As it is right now, the stock is not quite inletted far enough for us to be able to run off this mag, or I tried one of the P mags as well. This is an Accurate mag bottom metal right here. It includes the bottom metal with this nice huge latch right here, and a giant trigger guard for your big thick gloves if you want to be shooting in winter. And it also came with this magazine right here. The total product, if I remember correctly, comes out to be about 250 bucks for the three parts that you see right here: trigger guard, bottom metal, and then the magazine. But there is an issue right now where this isn't seated far enough up toward the action for the bolt to be able to pick up the next round. It just kind of glides right over the top. I was able to test this in a little scenario a couple of months ago. I just had to take this out and do a little bit of kind of preliminary work with it, and I found out that I had to kind of hold the magazine up in order to get the rounds in there. Now there are a couple of ways that we can deal with this issue, and I'm going to show you both. I'm not actually going to do one of them, I'll just talk about it. But then one of them I will actually perform on this rifle, and I think that some of you others, in case you run into this issue, you'll be able to know how to deal with it. When I was testing this rifle a few months ago, if I tried to pick up a round off the magazine like this, it would just slide right over the top, wouldn't catch anything. However, if I pushed up on the magazine, and maybe you can see inside the inlet, right, or inside the action, and you can see how much play there is with the magazine. If it's all the way in its topmost position, it picked it up just fine. And I've already measured that distance using my calipers right here. I just measured from the top of the floor plate right here up to this point right under this little pinhole. And that came out to be a difference when this is down versus up. This difference is 80 thousandths, so it's almost 1/10 of an inch. In fact, we could probably take it up a full 1/10 of an inch, and we'd probably be just fine. Now, one thing that we do have to watch out for, we don't want to get this too far up, otherwise it'll be difficult to insert and eject the magazine. There just won't be enough clearance, and we might also bonk these feed lips against the bolt. So we're going to have to be pretty careful. This is going to take some trial and error. And now we're going to check out two different ways that we can increase the distance upward on this bottom metal. One of them is going to be kind of permanent, and then one of them is going to be more difficult, but it will allow you to kind of swap the bottom metal around between different stocks if you ever think you might need to do that, which I will in this case. Here's how the depth is set between the stock, the action, and the bottom metal. Right here you can see a wooden shelf that connects right on the front. There's this big pad right here. And then going along the sides and around the back right there, those are the parts that actually touch the bottom metal. So that just sits in there like that. So what we need to do is we either need to make this thinner, or we need to make this a little thinner here. This is the easy way. If you think that you are just going to finish this rifle off, this is how it's always going to be, you don't think you'll ever swap stocks or anything like that, then just take your bottom metal And then if you just have a sheet of sandpaper that you can maybe tack down on a piece of wood or something, just keep this going for a while until you have your correct dimensions set. Make sure that you measure this very precisely while you're doing that. If you have a belt sander, it's going to go a whole lot faster. You can just plop this on top of the belt sander, roughly hold it in place, and again, make sure that you're getting equal sanding all the way across the bottom surface. And that's going to get you a just fine dimension, and that's going to work out great for you. For me, however, and for some of you that you want to work on a different piece, and now usually when you're making some kind of change, you want to go with the cheapest part first. You guys that do automotive work, you know exactly how this goes. Modify the cheapest part, see how it goes. And in this case, it's roughly equal. I don't know. This one is a bit more expensive. The stock is $190, or I guess it's $205 now. But if you want to pick which one you want to do, just go for it. But what we're going to do on this one is I'm going to remove some of the wood through here, and then we'll use that to lower the dimension. And this one is going to take quite a bit more work, and it's going to be a little bit fiddly to deal with, but in the end, I think we're going to be really happy with the result. The depth of the bottom metal is determined by this shelf right here and right here. You can see that there are some little steps going through here, but what we want to do is take these dimensions down some. And we're going to find out what those dimensions are first so that we can measure this whole thing. And now if I use the backside of our calipers, I can use this like a depth mic and see that we're getting somewhere around 1.210, or it's somewhere around 1.2, pretty close on the backside here. There are some differences in the dimension. This is wood after all, not steel, so there can be a little bit of difference around here. But then on the front side, let's see what's going on these. It's difficult to get perfectly flush on these. Okay, so we're looking at 1.210. So these are the shelves that we're going to be bringing down. And so we're going to need to bring these down about 80 thousandths. So we are going to end up at 1.130. And that should be our perfect height on both the back and the front. Now what we're going to do is we're really going to dig into this surface all the way around right up to the edge. And that's a bit of a tricky business. You could use a chisel if you want to do something that's much more precise. We're actually just going to dig into this with a Dremel because this is what most of us are going to have. But first, I'm going to create some protected areas that we're not going to touch. So I'm just going to take a Sharpie, leave a dot on each side of this hole for the action screw. And let me just get a little closer here so you can take a look. Okay, so there are my two dots. Pardon me. And then I'm going to do the same on the back. I'm going to leave a couple of spots as close to the edge as I can get them, because this is going to work really well with my little DIY vernier caliper depth mic. So we'll just get right up to the edge and we'll leave those. I might try out a couple of different bits to dig into here. This is a diamond one. These don't move all that fast just because they're really not all that crunchy. This one has done a really good job of quickly carving down in the past. I'm not exactly sure what this thing is called, but it does really well. So yeah, we'll try a couple different ones. And we don't have to be afraid of going too far this way. There's plenty of meat in all directions. What we have to worry about is punching through the sidewall. So try to just go straight down with all of these. It does have to go a little bit into the edge, a little bit further. And we're going to epoxy bed everything under here to get the proper dimension back. The only place to leave alone is don't go through that wall too far and leave these little dots alone. All right, we have a nice chewed up surface. It doesn't matter that it's ugly. We're going to be filling all that in with epoxy anyway. And then back here at the back, it's looking pretty good. We have the pads remaining. Even if we just have a tiny little bit, it's going to be enough. Now we need to take a special measurement to make sure that as we reduce these, that we can measure the distance that we've traveled. We need to get the pads down to 1.130. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that down. All right, so all of those need to be 1.130 according to the floor right here. But then we also need to keep an eye on this. So we're going to go ahead and measure the distances right now to the tops of these holes. And we're going to watch these as we bring this down. This one is 1.920. And we need to change this to 1.840. So when this is hit 1.840, we'll know that we've won. And then on the back, we're looking at 2.245. So we need to change this one to 2.165. To reduce the height of these pads nice and evenly, we need something that's a bit more precise than a Dremel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this bit that actually came from my Dremel tool. It's just a stone that has a nice flat surface right here, great for sanding. We're going to chuck this up into the drill press and then little by little reduce those dimensions until we hit the marks that we're after. We may have to come back and remove a little bit more material around here if something is still a little proud, still sticking up a little bit. I don't anticipate it. I think I came down enough, but this will just press down into it. If you don't have something like this, why don't you just cut off a section of dowel like this one? Just cut off enough that you can chuck it up into a drill press or something. And then you can use the flat end and put a little sandpaper, glue some sandpaper on here with some really good glue, and then you can press down into that, and I think that should work fine. Let's check our work. The new dimensions are in place. I have the bottom metal and everything installed, sort of. I did find out one thing. We're going to have to shorten up these screws that came with the bottom metal. They're just a little bit too long now. They're kind of hanging loose just a little bit under here because they will prevent the bolt from actually engaging. So here's the magazine. We're going to pop this in. And first off, I want to see if the bolt head is going to strike the magazine feed lips at any point. And if it's pushed up to its highest position, it looks like it does kind of catch it at the very front, and that's just fine. When this is just kind of hanging loose down here, it does not touch the feed lips. That's exactly right. So let's see if we can run around in this thing. We need to see if we can actually catch the rim. Okay, so I've got a live round in here. I have the safety in the middle position so I don't accidentally fire. And then let's give it a slap. There we go. Nice feed, nice ejection. I think we are good to go. All we have to do is shorten up those screws and then put a nice epoxy bed under here. And then that should do it. Before we get into the epoxy, let's go ahead and figure out exactly what length our screws need to be. You can see right there sticking up inside the action, I'm just shining a flashlight in there. That's about 1 thread, maybe 1.5 threads too tall. I'm going to go ahead and cut off 2 to make sure everything is below the surface. That's the rear screw. And let's check on the front one. The front one's a little bit difficult to see back there. You can just see it hiding out there, right there. Yeah, it looks like we need to trim off at least 2 back there to get that short enough that the bolt lugs will actually clear. Trimming a screw down is easy. I just put it into a vise, not hard enough to actually crush the threads in there and mess them up, but just enough to hold it. And then I'm just going to take a hacksaw and chop off 3 of these threads right here. I was actually looking at the front from a little bit of a different angle, and I could see that I needed to cut off about 3 to get flush. Now that that's done, I need to clean up the threads a little bit. As you can see, that's pretty jagged on the end. And normally what I would do is chuck this into a drill and then just kind of spin this and turn it off with a file, but I think I can just do this one by hand. There we go. Let's lay down some epoxy. You can see that I have marked my 4 high points. Everything's looking good right there. Everything else is lower than that and roughed up pretty well. Now, one thing I'm going to point out is that I got a little bit too deep right there. You can see a little bit of a crack going through to where the recoil area, the recoil lug area is. Not a big deal. We'll just we'll be putting a little epoxy in there anyway. It shouldn't have any kind of structural issues or anything like that. It's just really thin wood back there. So you might want to watch how far you kind of push your Dremel work that way. So let's take a quick look at everything that we're going to need. This is the epoxy that we're using, DevCon 10110 steel putty. I have a stick to mix it up and then an old lid from a Play-Doh container. These lids are awesome. I have some Play-Doh right here to fill in any sections that we need to protect. Kind of create little dams to keep the epoxy from getting into certain things. This one's going to be pretty easy. I don't think there's much we're going to mask off. I have a little bit of Scotch tape for putting on the bottom metal right here, and then to protect the rest of it and keep it from sticking, we'll just use brown shoe polish. This worked out great on that base bedding that we did a little bit ago, and this should work great again. And we're also going to put a little grease or something on these screws to keep them from sticking in place as well. First thing I'm going to do is put a little Play-Doh down on the other side where that recoil lug recess is. So I'm just gonna smush a little bit of this down there. That'll just keep the epoxy from pushing back up into this area. Some folks might want to fill in this whole recess right here with Play-Doh just to keep epoxy from dripping down toward the action. This epoxy is very thick. I'm not concerned about it really heading toward the action, but mostly I do want that area to be open so that I can have some relief. When we get the epoxy in here and then press the bottom metal down, that epoxy is going to want to go somewhere, and I don't want it to go up. If it does, it's going to make very tight tolerances on either side of this. And this is feeling just fine as it is. This is feeling quite nice. You know, if I ever want to be able to remove this, put it back in, I'm going to want a little bit of wiggle room. So I'm going to want the epoxy to squish out kind of into this recess. The only area where I'm thinking that I might want to put a little bit is this little cutout right here. This is for some of the other magazine systems, I suppose. This might be for the standard Savage double stack mag. So I'll just go ahead and put that there. Once we mix up this epoxy, we have about 45 minutes of playtime, and then we have to stop touching it. We have a very simple job here, so that's not going to be too big an issue, but just make sure that you keep everything within that 45 minutes. Please excuse the change in lighting. I'm using my lamp right now to warm up the epoxy. It's just a little bit too thick to move right now. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to take a look at the bottom metal. We'll get this protected all the way around. I'm going to put some tape on this side all the way around so that I can just easily peel this off, and it's going to take up a little bit of the gap to make sure that epoxy doesn't kind of squish up this direction, kind of push everything more in this direction. So yeah, tape all the way around here, and then cover everything, all of these surfaces on the sides and back and on the bottom with the brown shoe polish. This tape is just the right width. Some grease for the screws. And now it's time to mix up the epoxy. This is 2.5 of the steel to 1 of the hardener. if you go by volume. You can do this by weight or by volume, either one. I think it's a 10-to-1 if you go by weight. That's looking just about right there. Try to avoid bubbles if you can. Time to lay it down. I'm going to put the epoxy everywhere but those little high spots. I'm going to leave those. We might end up with a thin layer over the top anyway. That just happens. But I'm not going to put it there on purpose. Okay, I have epoxy in all the proper places. I'm avoiding some of these little high spots. And now it's time to put this in place. And now we're going to crush this into place using the action and the screws. I'm not torquing these screws down all the way, because there is going to be a little bit of compression in the wood. So we'll just go ahead and we'll get it pretty close, but not torqued all the way down. Take a look inside. We have some epoxy squeezing out into the area where the magazine is going to go. So let's go ahead and clean up what we can see. That's it. Now we just have to wait 24 hours to see how it all came out. All right, let's see how we did. All right, we really don't have much spill inside here, not much overflow. So now it's time to just tap this out and see what we have. I'm using a hammer and a little block of wood. That should help protect the finish. Okay, there it goes. Alright, so there's the bottom metal. Looks like nothing really stuck to it. That's good. Just got a little bit here around the screw hole. We can knock that out with a just a little piece of wood or a piece of plastic or something. It looks like the epoxy is nice and smooth in the places that count. So up here at the front we have a nice big flat pad, and then back here at the back where we had our kind of high spots, yeah, we have full coverage right back through there, and it gets a little crummy where I was kind of trailing off through here. So now we can clean up these edges and make the whole piece fit a little bit better just by trimming this down a tiny little bit. This is going to be a nice tight fit in the future. It looks like it's going to press in with a little bit of tension. Once I take this tape off, I think this should slide in just a little bit more easily though. But this looks like it came out just fine. I'm just using a wooden dowel with some sandpaper on it to clean up these edges. It's a handy little tool for when you have little work like this to do. Tape is off, shoe polish is off. And that's a nice press fit. No rattle, no movement at all. This is going to be a nice solid piece to have in here. Function test. I have 3 different kinds of ammo in here, 2 rounds of each. We're going to start off with BTHP Match from Hornady. These are the new Speer Gold Dot bullets. And these are Speer hot core. All right, that works great. The bolt was riding right over the top of the next round down in the sequence. Everything was feeding very smoothly. Once I'm actually in a shooting position instead of kind of standing off to the side, this should run pretty darn smoothly. And I can't wait to try this out with the PMag as well. Everything feels really tight. Everything's locked up really nicely. And actually, I'm going to check one thing. I'm going to see if I can continue to run the bolt if I'm pushing the mag all the way up into its highest position. Yeah, actually I can. The bolt will push down the front of the feed lips a little bit, but if I do happen to be resting on the magazine, it's not going to mess anything up. Thanks a lot for watching. I think we all learned a little something today. This is a tricky little scenario to deal with. This is one where you don't necessarily have a manual that says do this and then you'll get X result. This is one where you just kind of have to figure it out as you go along and see how it works out. I think this will work great over time. I'll let you know how it goes if there's a particular magazine that fouls up on it, like maybe the PMag or something. But I think overall I just expect good things. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos where we finally get through the hand loading and everything, get out into testing and see how it all works out. And thank you to everybody that has made this project possible. Thanks to the manufacturers that donated some of the parts, like the Accurate Mag bottom metal and the SWFA scope. But for everything else, thank you patrons of the Destructive Arts for keeping the lights on and for buying the rifle itself and certain other parts that we're going to use in this. Thank you to Sportsman's Guide at the 338 Lapua Magnum level and Peter at the 300 Win Mag level. I'll see you guys around. If anybody else wants to chip in $1 or $2 a month to keep this project going and some of the others that we have coming up, I'll put a link to Patreon down here. I'll see you all around. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These 2 videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, The Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.